Have our tariffs hurt China? I'm Richard Daigle with Tychos. Has our administration's aggressive new tariff regime had its intended effect, especially as regards China's trade preeminence and the respective trade positions of China and the U.S.? Generally speaking, no, with perhaps a little bit of yes. The first thing to look at is China's export profile. Our average U.S. tariffs on imports from China are now 57.6%, with exceptions and variations, as opposed to the 20.7% under the prior administration. But even with these tariffs and our posturing and jawboning, China's gross exports and net exports remain robust and are actually up from the levels of the last few years. They stand at a whopping net position of 6% of China's GDP. Their position remains giant and world-leading by any measure. This clearly means that China has found other markets for its products to account for reduced exports to the U.S., and probably also means they are still exporting goods to us through channels that disguise their source. As you can see here, China's trade surplus with the ASEAN nations, a consortium of Asian nations, has grown by almost the exact same amount their trade surplus with the U.S. has declined, while at the same time the U.S. trade deficit with the ASEAN nations has grown by almost the same amount their trade deficit with China has declined. So, and as you may have noticed, our dependence on China for such critical items as critical minerals for chips and for our pharmaceuticals has limited how aggressive we can be. You could argue that the U.S. should have built up its capabilities in those areas before instituting an aggressive tariff regime. Illegal fentanyl imports have figured prominently in the rationale for tariffs on China and certain other countries, and they appear to be slightly down, though most of that reduction occurred through policies and actions that began in 2019, prior to the current administration and its tariffs. So much for hurting China. So how is the U.S. trade profile? Our data is a month old due to the government shutdown, but if we look at the U.S. trade deficit with China, it actually has improved. Imports from China have declined from over 2% of GDP in 2022 to half that, or 1.0% today. Exports are down as well at 0.5% as compared to 0.7 to 0.8% in the previous years. And overall, the net position has improved from negative 1.7% to more around negative 0.5% to 0.9% more recently. Though, as mentioned, some of that improvement may have just shifted to other countries who are serving as illicit go-betweens. We say that because when we look at the U.S. trade deficit as a whole, our net export position with the world has improved only a very small fraction and is still quite large. In the most recent quarter, it was a still high negative 2.5%. That's a little better than the negative 3.1 in 2024, than the negative 2.8% in 2023, and pretty close to the negative 2.7% posted way back in 2019. So that's a very little bit of an improvement, but still a long way from the zero trade deficit promised by the new administration. Both U.S. exports and imports are down, and our actual tariffs across the world now on average are 17.9%, which is up from 2.4% prior to the new tariff regime. Notably, the improvement has come at least partly on the backs of households and partly on the impaired earnings of corporations. U.S. corporations have had particularly robust earnings over the last several years, so they get very little sympathy here, whether that's a deserved position or not. But it's unlikely that they will be able to continue to absorb the cost of tariffs to the same degree going forward. GM, for example, reported that tariffs reduced its second quarter 2025 earnings by about $1.1 billion for the quarter, contributing to a roughly one-third drop in net income from a year earlier. Even after some recent tariff relief and internal cost cutting, it still expects tariffs to shave 3.5 to 4.5 billion off its 2025 profits. Crucially, the effect of tariffs are showing up in food prices at a time when households are struggling with prices, which played an outsized role in our most recent elections. So we are looking at what you might call an unexpected move. The Trump administration is reportedly preparing broad exemptions to certain tariffs in an effort to ease these elevated food prices. As the Wall Street Journal reported just a day or two ago, the president on Friday moved to end dozens of agricultural and food goods, marking a significant rollback of his so-called reciprocal levies as he looks for ways to address the cost of living. Trump issued an executive order modifying the reciprocal tariffs he imposed on virtually every trading partner in August, exempting more than 100 common food items, including fruits, nuts, and spices, end quote. Note that it's a challenge to actually keep track of all this, since there have been hundreds of changes to tariffs under the new administration. One analyst actually counted over 500 such changes, which not surprisingly increases the difficulties in managing trade that is faced by business. And that's it for this week. Next week following is Thanksgiving, so we'll be off. So we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving, and thanks for tuning in.